Good morning, everybody. Uneducated Economist here. So, the Federal Reserve is not going to extend the SLR exemption, the supplemental leverage ratio. Now, I done a video a couple of days ago talking about this, and in that video, I had said that I believe the Federal Reserve was going to extend the supplemental leverage ratio, or the SLR, at least in a partial fashion. And the reason is that or the reason why I believe that is because I didn't think the Federal Reserve would want to put out there the idea that they were in a monetary tightening kind of policy. Right? The Federal Reserve wants to keep this idea that there is still the easy money credit, flow of credit going to households and businesses. That's the idea that is still out there, to remain incredibly supportive of the economy. You think about it, all the stimulus packages going out there and even talk of even more to come. The economy is not doing very well, and you would think that the Federal Reserve does not want to put out there any idea that they are about ready to raise interest rates. However, they do want the idea out there that there is going to be inflation into the future, because they have been dying to get inflation for the last 12 years and have seeked to get any inflation, or at least the inflation target that they have been shooting for, and somehow they're all of a sudden going to get this inflation magically. Well, it doesn't happen by what the Fed's actions are. It happens by the people's actions. And if the people start going out there and start spending their money very quickly, or at least get on the perception that there's going to be inflation in the future and start behaving in that fashion, then inflation definitely comes. See, inflation isn't about whether or not there's price increases. Inflation is the expansion of money and credit. That has already taken place. There is no doubt about it. Inflation is already here. What we don't have is the money velocity. We do not have what the Federal Reserve is looking for as far as the price inflation and the consumer items that they are looking at. We all see price inflation. Just look at houses, look at cars and building materials and everything else. Like, all this money is being dumped into particular items of the economy, but it's not going into the economy as a whole. It's because those particular items that are really shooting up in price are going up because of all the credit that's flowing into them, not because of all the money that's flowing into it. But it doesn't matter how it's getting there, it's still going there, and that's what's happening. So the Federal Reserve is trying to unwind that asset bubble inflation. They want to take some of the pressure out of the housing market and the stock market and the bond market, and the only way to do that is with the raising of interest rates. But if you start raising interest rates, everybody's going to start freaking out and start holding on to their money, thinking, oh man, the Federal Reserve is raising these interest rates. There's going to be deflation into the future as the economy starts to slow down, and that's not what the Federal Reserve is intending on doing. So somehow they have to maintain this idea that there's going to be easy flow of credit going into the economy, at the same time raise the interest rates to keep the asset bubbles from inflating and popping. It's a very difficult task. But right now, that's exactly what you're seeing taking place. So this SLR exemption, let's get back into talking about that. If the whole idea of the supplemental leverage ratio was to ease up money, to provide easier loans or the flow of loans to households and businesses, then ending the exemption should do the exact opposite of that. Okay, so just to describe it real quickly, the supplemental leverage ratio, if you can imagine the bank's balance sheet, and I'm going to try and do this really, really simply. If you can imagine the bank's balance sheet, on the bank's balance sheet, they have assets and liabilities. The assets are all the loans out there, the loans for houses, cars, whatever. Those are the assets that they have. The liabilities is all the money that they have issued out there for the loan. So for us, it's exactly the opposite. The asset is like the house, the car, the stuff, and the liability is that debt that we owe. So the debt that we owe is the bank's asset. Their liability is all that money. What the Federal Reserve told the big banks a year ago is hey, some of your assets are like the U.S. Treasuries and the deposits at the Fed and stuff. Those are really, really safe and secure. You don't need to hold a ratio to those particular assets. You can go ahead and void that ratio out for a year. And what that did is it freed up a bunch of money to loan out there to households and businesses. That's why the Federal Reserve did it. They were trying to support households and businesses with the easy flow of credit. So the exemption ending is going to do the exact opposite of that. That is a form of monetary tightening. Now, it isn't exactly monetary tightening in the form of what the Federal Reserve would describe monetary tightening, but that's what it is. And you can see it taking place all around the world right now. Over in Brazil, I'll leave an article for Brazil. They're tightening up their monetary policy. I didn't quite read the article completely through. I just skimmed it, but I just wanted to make sure that it was what I thought it was, and it is. They're trying to bring in some of the liquidity that's going on. Who else? Japan. They had some funny wording inside of an article I was reading. They are going to, instead of like targeting interest rates, they are going to allow interest rates to float around their target. See, another shift, a shift in, that kind of perception. China's full-on monetary tightening. They just straight up say it. And that monetary tightening that's taking place in China right now is causing a bunch of corporate defaults. And it's something that I said was going to take place. And it's something that's going to take place here in this country as well if these interest rates continue to rise on the treasuries. See, what happens over there is that as people are looking for yield, they're looking for any place to get a return on their money. And the only place they find it is in these zombie corporations. And as the economy is booming and doing well, people are not worried about putting their money into these corporations and buying their bonds. They're just more interested in getting that return on the yield. But then now we're sitting in a position in which there's monetary tightening and the conditions are a little harder for these corporations in order to make their payments back on their bonds, and they start to default. And there's a sea of defaults taking place over in China right now on account of this monetary tightening that's taking place. And I said it, you got to watch China, because what's ever happening in China is going to start spreading around the rest of the world. And you can already see it happening here. And now we do not see those major corporate bond defaults taking place, but give it some time. Because what's going to end up happening is that if these 10-year treasury and longer dated treasuries continue to rise in yield, that's the price dropping. And if prices continue to drop and the yields continue to go up, the investor is eventually going to say, you know what? Forget them junk bonds. This U.S. Treasury is the place to be. See, junk bonds can have a chance of default. U.S. Treasuries, 0 chance of default. So if the Treasuries end up coming as close as they are to the junk bonds, why would anybody even invest in junk bonds? And people are going to start dumping that debt, that junk bond debt, all those corporations, and they're not going to be able to survive. These corporations only survive by rolling over old debt into new debt. And the moment they can't do that, they have to start consuming themselves. They have to start selling their own stock off. They have to start cutting employees. And then the whole system begins to crash down on itself. Just go look at China. Look at the article that I leave down in the description for you guys. I mean, this stuff has taken place. So, yeah, the SLR, the supplemental leverage ratio, by allowing that to expire, it only proves to me that the Federal Reserve is now on a monetary tightening policy. I mean, not straight up, but yeah, that's what they're doing. All right. Uneducated Economist. You guys let me know.